Purity's operation was a success, but she wouldn't be walking anytime soon. The doctor's words hit Charles like a ton of bricks. His wife would be confined to a wheelchair. Charles felt like his world had come crashing down. He remembered Deborah's kindness and rushed to her house, hoping she'd understand his new situation. When he arrived, Deborah was recovering from her false labor scare and the misunderstanding she had with Samuel because of Charles' frequent calls and messages. Deborah was able to convince the husband against all odds. However, Charles explained Purity's condition, and Deborah's heart went out to them. "I'll do whatever it takes to help," Deborah promised, her eyes welling up with tears. Charles was overwhelmed with gratitude. He didn't know how he'd repay Deborah's kindness despite his treatment to Deborah, but he knew he'd be eternally grateful. Charles always echoes in his mind, "Deborah is an angel, I've missed her forever." Even that Samuel and Deborah had settled over Charles' frequently calls, Samuel, Deborah's husband, was still puzzled about the mysterious transfer she made to Charles. He confronted Deborah, who explained the situation. Samuel's expression softened as he listened. "We'll support them," he said, "but we need to set boundaries." Deborah nodded in agreement. Together, they devised a plan to help Charles and Purity. Purity was discharged from the hospital, and Charles brought her home to their small apartment. Deborah visited often, bringing groceries and helping with Purity's care. As the days passed, Charles grew more dependent on Deborah's kindness. He began to feel guilty, knowing his ill treatment to Deborah. One day, Deborah suggested they move in with her family temporarily. Charles hesitated, but Purity's needs won out. The transition was chaotic, but Deborah's family welcomed Charles and Purity with open arms. Samuel became a source of guidance for Charles, offering words of encouragement and support. Purity slowly adjusted to her new life. Deborah helped her with physical therapy, and they bonded over shared experiences. As Charles watched Purity smile again, he felt a sense of hope. Maybe this tragedy would lead to something beautiful. Deborah's family became a surrogate family to Charles and Purity. They shared meals, stories, and laughter. Charles realized that sometimes, help comes in unexpected ways. He vowed to pay it forward someday. Purity's condition stabilized, and she began to find joy in her new reality. Charles and Deborah's friendship deepened. Samuel smiled as he saw his wife's kindness transform lives. "You're an angel, Deborah," he said. Deborah blushed, knowing her actions had brought hope to those in need. As they sat together as a family, Charles turned to Deborah and said, "You've changed our lives forever." As time passed, Charles grew increasingly dependent on Deborah's support. He began to take her kindness for granted, and his gratitude turned into expectation. Purity, sensing the change in Charles, felt her heart breaking. One day, Charles received a job offer in another city. He was torn between his responsibility towards Purity and the opportunity to rebuild his life. In a moment of weakness, he chose to pursue the job, leaving Purity behind. "I'm sorry, Purity," Charles said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll send you money, I promise." Purity's eyes welled up with tears as she realized she'd been abandoned. "How could you, Charles?" she whispered. Meanwhile, Charles's thoughts drifted to Deborah. He remembered her kindness, her compassion, and her beauty. He began to crave her presence in his life again, convincing himself that he'd made a mistake by staying with Purity. Charles arrived in the new city and started his new job. He couldn't shake off the feeling of emptiness, and his thoughts lingered on Deborah. He decided to reach out to her, hoping she'd forgive him for his past mistakes. "Deborah, I've been thinking about you," Charles said, his voice filled with longing. "I realize now that I made a mistake by staying with Purity. I want you to come back to my life." Deborah was taken aback by Charles's confession. She had moved on, finding happiness with Samuel. "Charles, I'm married now," she said firmly. "I've found happiness with Samuel. You need to make amends with Purity." Charles's face fell, but he refused to give up. He knew he'd hurt Purity, but he couldn't resist the pull of Deborah's kindness and beauty. He became determined to win Deborah back, no matter the cost. As Charles's obsession with Deborah grew, Purity's heart broke further. She realized she'd been abandoned not just physically but also emotionally. She wondered if she'd ever find happiness again. The story takes a darker turn as Charles's actions become more erratic. Will he realize his mistakes, or will his obsession consume him? What will happen to Purity, and how will Deborah respond to Charles's advances? The drama unfolds in episode 5.